Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome once again to the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Fredland, and joined by the panel, as always. Tonight we have Jim Reed, John Somsky, Rob Washam, and Chris Jones, who are part of this community of Rec Poker, this growing community, and we're excited that you have joined us for another episode. For those of you who are tuning in to hear Maria Ho, she unfortunately had to reschedule. So right now we're planning on chatting with her on December 16th. So tonight we're going to do another edition of Listener Questions, which is something we're trying to do more of, where we get questions from you guys, the listeners, what's on your mind, what strategy questions, what specific hands you want us to break down. And so we're doing another one of those. And we're doing this again, as we've just started doing as a Facebook Live simulcast. So that's we do it live Monday evenings. And then we record it and put it out as a podcast as well. I want to thank our official sponsor of all things Rec Poker, Running Aces, Racetrack and Casino. They've been with us from the beginning and planning on sticking with us till the end. And also thank you to Learn Pro Poker. They are also a sponsor of the podcast. This is Ryan LaPlante's new training site, and we highly recommend it. And we have an affiliate relationship with them. So if you want to check out Learn Pro Poker and support Rec Poker, you can go to rec.poker and you can go to our affiliate area and you can click on Learn Pro Poker and you can sign up there. That'll help us out. It'll give you great content. And we actually are going to be using some of that content going forward in some of our discussions. Running Aces Players of the Week. A tie up top with a lot of points this week. 45 points is quite a few points. Brian Morey and Boomer Schumer. Boomer, way to go. Brian, way to go. They both had 45 points. So they're going to pick up a cool $225 bonus for that. $5 per point for the top four players. Third place was Charles Marcy with 32 points. And a tie in fourth place. Ike Thomas and Now Yang with 26 points. I know Now is also known as B, and him and I tangled quite a bit recently. And so very good players. Congratulations to all of you guys. And also one of the things that we're starting now as we continue to build our community is communicating with the broad Rec Poker audience who had a bink in the last week. And going forward from this point, it's only going to be folks who are actually members of the Rec Poker community, those of you who are paying the $10 a month to be members, get all the content, be part of all the discussions, all of that. If you are a member and if you have a bink, in other words, if you have a win that you want us to share on the Rec Poker podcast, let us know and we'll share it. I just want to share a few of the recent binks that we had from people who are part of the broader Rec Poker Nation. Those who are plugged in any capacity who maybe put these out on their Discord channel or somewhere else. But Jake Mason turned $160 into $1,900 at Diamond Joe's. Andrew Feist turned $75 into $600 at Survive and Thrive at Running Aces. David Baer and Michael Babker went first and second on November 14th, turning $50 into $854 and $508 respectively. Rob Washam up at Grand Casino Mille Lacs turned $140 into $1,300. Myself, I was able to turn $50 into $918 on November 21st. David Baer, again, $40 into $1,293 on November 23rd. And just yesterday, Cheyenne Bhattacharya turned $50 into $779, all at Running Aces. And so these are all wins among those who are part of Rec Poker Nation. So congratulations to all of those. A couple other announcements. I mentioned Maria Ho already. Ryan LaPlante from Learn Pro Poker is going to join us next Monday night. Next Wednesday night, December 4th at 6:30 p.m. Central, we're going to have our next hand history discussion led by Chris Jones. These are fantastic discussions that all of our members are welcome to join, and they'll also get a recording of these hand histories. We learned so much through those conversations. And then also next Wednesday, December 4th, the first Wednesday of the month, is our Poker Stars home game. This will be our fourth one, and we're looking to crown another new champion. John Somsky won it last month, and we'll see if he can repeat. That starts at 8 o'clock p.m. Go to rec.poker, click on the home game. All the instructions are there. If you've never been on Poker Stars, get out there because you need to get some points. So you need to kind of log in a couple times to get enough points to play that tournament. It's free of charge, but you need these play points in order to play. The NFL Survivor pool is down to 5 people, and all 5 of them advanced this week. And then just a final reminder, go to Rec Doc Poker and connect with us however you see fit. We've got a free Discord channel where you can chat and talk about hands, and we can rail each other, encourage each other. We have the membership area. You've got the email list, Twitter, Facebook, all kinds of ways that you can connect. So with that, let's move into our listener questions. The first one comes from David Baer, the guy who just won two tournaments recently, and he had a question that he posted in Discord. And again, that's a free content area that you can be a part of for free and be part of these conversations and learn quite a bit through these conversations and ask questions. But David had a spot. He was in a $50 weekly tournament at Running Aces. And there are 10 minutes left until the first break, and that's when the rebuy deadline occurs. So you could rebuy up until that first break. There's still 10 minutes left. He was in the big blind. He had 25 big blinds or 10,000 chips, which is the starting stack because the blinds are at 400. So he had 25 big blinds, and he had ace-king suited, so a monster hand, but a ton of action in front of him. So under the gun was an unknown young kid who was new to the table, and he went all in for 10 big blinds. So David had 10,000 chips. This kid went all in for about 4,000 chips. Then in the low jack, sort of a late middle position, an older gentleman who David had played with before, who's fairly tight, a passive player generally, re-raises all in for his 30 big blinds. So he bought 12,000 chips he ships in for. And then even more action on the button, a relatively loose player also goes all in for a little bit less, 25 big blinds. And so David's asking, I wake up with ace-king suited, but there's 3 all-ins in front of me from under the gun, low jack, and button. What is my play? And before we open it up to the panel, here's a few comments from Discord. This was David's, what he did in his thinking. David said, I chose to fold, which felt really tight, but I think the low jack's range is heavily skewed toward high pocket pairs, pocket jacks, and higher. And the other two are probably sharing some of my outs. At the time, I felt like I was at a pretty passive table that I could fairly easily chip up at by stealing blinds, etc. So I decided to take the lower variance line since I felt like I had a decent skill edge at this table. Although I think everyone, myself included, has an exaggerated view of their own skill. And I love how he said that. A few other comments from Discord. One person said, I don't mind this fold at all. With the number of players already committed, not only are you sharing outs, but your hand equity goes down as well. I would wait for a better spot. Somebody else said, easy fold. In a bigger tourney, I might call it off. Someone else, in my opinion, it's just a risk tolerance play. In a large field tourney, I'd be more inclined to take this variance play, but in a smaller field tourney, I might just fold. I put in some guesses at ranges, and under my guess, you have 24 to 27% equity in a 4-way pot here. So you're not really winning money by calling, and you're not really losing money by folding. Another comment. I think you are giving your villains way too strong of ranges in a $50 MTT. It's an easy ship. If we can have almost 100 big blinds in a turbo around first break, it gives us a massive advantage over our opponents. I'm thrilled to get my stack in this spot. This is honestly a spot we should be dreaming of to chip up early in a tournament. So there it is. So with all of those thoughts, I want to open it up to the panel. What are your thoughts for David in this situation?
Comments was mine.
I didn't get permission on everybody's comments, so I didn't want to assign them to people.
And I agree with the fold at this point. You talk about sharing outs, and you might not even be sharing outs, but you could be up against 3 pairs. You could be up. The older gentleman, the low jack, probably has some sort of pair like he was thinking, jacks plus. The big blind or the under the gun, he's new to the table. He's only got 10 big blinds, so he could be really wide. But then the button, he's got the same stack you have. He sees 2 players go all in front of him, and he still shoves all his chips. So he's going to have probably a pocket pair of 8s, 9s, 10s at the very minimum. So I think it's a coin flip at best, and with that many hands you're up against, it really dilutes your equity.
Yeah, I also think the guy that has the widest range here is the under the gun shover with 10 big blinds. And you're only up against him for your first 10 big blinds, and the rest of your stack, which is more than that of your chips, are up against these tighter ranges that I think you're just not doing well enough ahead. It feels like a very nitty fold, but especially if you feel like you've got a chance to pick up some better spots later in the tournament, I think it's just one of those where it's a fold to me.
Yeah, in my mind, I'm probably leaning towards a fold as well, but just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, the $50 tournaments do have a really fast blind structure. You're already down to 25 bigs, and after the break, you're going to probably be at 20, depending upon where you're, how the blinds are moving up. So the fact that it's a fast blind structure and you're already relatively low increases the amount that I would want to call. I think there's still too much action here, particularly someone calling for 25 big blinds after a 30 big blind push represents quite a bit of strength. This is a $50 tournament, so it could be a jackpot play, but I could easily see someone else having an ace king or at least your ace outs being greatly diminished. So I don't mind the fold at all. If you really want to try to win it and you're still in the rebuy period and you really feel like gambling, fine, go ahead and call. I don't totally hate it, but I think the better EV play is to fold.
I'm gonna probably take the counter point here, and that is, first of all, I think when we get to a tournament like this, I think we have to, especially this kind of, we have to decide going in, or at least based on turnout, if we're willing to rebuy. I mean, that's something I think you have to consider before any tournament that you enter. What's the number of entries? What's the prize pool in which I'm going to be willing to rebuy? Am I ever willing to rebuy? And if we are in this tournament, and then I think this might be a point where we take a stand. And the reason I'm thinking that is when we say things like we have a skill edge, or I felt like I had a skill edge at the table, I think we have to be more specific and ask ourselves some questions about what we mean by that. I think there's different skill edges we can have. And some people will feel very comfortable having a skill edge in that they can take a small stack and they have a skill edge running with a 20 big blind stack, and like they're not going to cough it up for nothing, versus some people might have a skill edge when they're deeper stacked, and they're able to say, with an 80 or 90 big blind stack, I have a massive skill advantage over other people at the table, versus when we're all around that 20 big blind kind of area. And for me, I feel like if I can rebuy and have basically the same stack, if I'm willing to rebuy, I can come back and have the same stack that I currently have, or I can walk away from this situation 25 to 27% of the time with like a 85, 90 big blind stack. In this kind of tournament with this turbo of a structure, I feel like I have a much better chance of winning the tournament. And as we all know, this kind of tournament is the one where you're going to make your money at the top. And I think this might be worth taking that chance.
Yeah, that's kind of where I landed too, Chris. I mean, I had the same sort of thought that I put on Discord, like, what is the skill edge? Like, because I know David is a really, really good player, and I think, him having 85 or 90 big blinds is a huge, huge advantage. And I didn't actually run like ICM numbers, so early in the tournament to really do that. But like, so 3/4 of the time you're going to have zero value left in the tournament. And then 1/4 of the time you're going to have, I don't know, how much value do you have in the tournament by quadrupling up or whatever at that point in the tournament. I think it's I think it's an interesting spot. I think for me, it would come down to, that low jack player, is that range accurate? Is it really just jacks or better? If that's really accurate, then it's kind of a tough thing. But if you can imagine scenarios where he would do that with ace queen or ace jack, especially, if he's a good enough player where he knows that the under the gun, young kid might be more aggressive, and ace queen or ace jack, he might be trying to isolate that. If the range is expanded a bit to something like pocket eights or better, ace jack, maybe even king queen, then I think I'm sort of the fist pump, get it all in with ace king and just hope. I know the button still calls there. I realize that, but at least there you've kind of moved your equity gauge a little bit. I think that's it. I think for me, it's, when you're in that sort of expansionary stage of that tournament, that phase 2 of the tournament, and if you can give me 80 or 90 big blinds when everybody else is sitting there at 20 or 30, I feel really good about my chances, and I think David would as well. So it might be a risk worth taking. That's where the numbers it could be a little bit skewed. So from a pure EV perspective, it seems like a wash. But if those 25% of the time that you do win, I think it's more than that much value in actual tournament value, I guess.
Now, I did run this through Equilab, and I gave Under the Gun a standard push fold 10 big blind shoving range, and I give the low jack jacks plus ace king and ace queen suited. So he's got ace queen suited, and I gave the button 10s plus ace king and ace queen suited, which is probably tighter than he actually would call, but there are some non-ace king, non-pair hands in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me the hero's equity is 21.34.
Yeah.
And that's assuming that you're getting your full stack against that under the gun player with the wider range. And the worst part about it is that it's 21.34 and 5.45% of that is tie equity. So you're only actually winning outright 15, 16% of the time. And the rest of the time you're chopping with one of these guys. So you'd have to, I mean, that stuff's only as good as the assumptions you make about their ranges, but
right.
I found you had to loosen up their ranges pretty wide, especially the guy under the button who's just calling,
right.
In order to make it a plus EV call.
Well, I think at this point of the tournament, I mean, just another point is we're early enough on that the ICM implications should be negligible.
Yeah.
So you're really just the Equilab calculations that Jim made, or whatever Equilab calculation you come up with based upon your assumptions, are what you need to go with, because it's really just chip EV at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. The fact that the pure, EV is just a chip EV. I think for me, it's that where it moves in the direction is maybe what Chris is getting at too, is the skill edge of playing with a big stack. So, the opportunity to chip up even more, as people are starting to shove in on the, before the rebuy or after the rebuy, when people have 10 big blinds, the opportunity to sort of, take that stack and turn it into something more. It doesn't really factor into an ICM calculation, but I feel like it's a factor if you feel like you're good at playing a big stack in those tournaments.
And I should say, when I did widen the ranges in Equilab and gave the low jack and the button more like a 10 to 12% range there, we actually improved to about 27% equity with only 3% tie equities. So that would make it, again, depending on how you crunch the numbers on the stack sizes, that would make it much closer to at least neutral or slightly positive EV call.
Is it easy in that tool? I'm kind of ignorant with that tool to like easily take out one player at a time. Like, I think this would be a good learning thing for me, but also for all of us to be like, okay, what if that button wasn't in there? What if that person wasn't in there at all? What does our equity look like? What if it was just the under the gun player? Can you kind of like remove them one at a time and give us an idea of how the equity changes as more people are getting into the pot?
You can. It's actually really easy to do it in the tool menu, and you can also set up the ranges that you think are in play and the amount of equity you'd need to call, and then have it calculate a calling range, and it'll tell you what hands are in that range. So I did run that for this, and in the very tight ranges that we described, you're only getting the appropriate equity when you call with queens plus. And as you widen the ranges, you get to 10s plus ace king, ace queen suited. So you can, and I was thinking I might post a link up in the show notes or something to a little video going through that aspect of the Equilab's features, because it's a great program.
So what do you think? What's your gut? I know you probably don't have it up right now, but like if the button wasn't in there, say it was just the under the gun 10 big blind shove and then the low jack reshoves for 30, without the button in there, is this become a much easier decision? Or, how much difference does that third player make?
I didn't run for that in the program, but my gut tells me that the low jack's actually the tightest range here. So as long as he's the one that you're going stack to stack with your entire stack, then ace king is probably just worse the tighter his range is, and I'm not sure. It's probably better just because.
Right, you're getting less, but you're getting less
but
chips.
Yes,
also.
exactly.
So you think this is pretty close to a fold, even if it's just the low jack reship? Putting you on the spot. I know you don't have the numbers in front of you.
It feels like just anecdotally, I've been in tournaments where I've been in this spot and looked down at ace king, and usually when I've called, I've lost. So I don't know if that factors in. But
you've been talking to George Sanford, I see.
Right, there you go. Yes, exactly. So it's I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but okay. I think this is it's the low jack guy that, in a way, you're most concerned about, because he's been described as being older, passive, and tight.
Right.
So when they overshove, it's not usually balanced or with a much in the middle of his range. It's usually just the top, I think.
Chris, what was your thought there?
Well, what do we? I mean, like, I guess I wasn't there, and I don't know what this low jack is, but my gut tells me that, or my experience tells me too, that this low jack, I think we're tightening this low jack too much. I mean, I know that the description was they're just jacks plus, but I mean, what is this player going to do with 30 big blinds when the under the gun raises to 10 big blinds and they're sitting there with tens?
Or ace?
Are they just going to open fold? Are they calling? Are they calling a 10 big blind shove and just hoping that everyone folds behind them? That's ultimately why I also think this. I think we're the button actually makes me more worried than the low jack. When somebody comes over calls all in or goes over all in behind that low jack, that's a range I give a lot of credit to, even from a relatively loose player. But I'm still thinking they might be coming in with that range we were talking about of ace queen, probably ace queen suited, but and probably tens plus. But I still think we've got a lot of equity here, and we're in the rebuy period, and I'm taking my shot here. And I feel like we have that 25 to 27% equity. I just don't think that people are as tight as when they're in this kind of tournament, when it's this quick of blinds, when you started with 100 big blind stack and 4 levels later you're down to 20 to 25 big blinds. I think people are starting to feel that urgency and
being greatly diminished.
Yeah.
So I don't mind the fold at all.
John, did you have something else there?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I agreed with Chris's calculation. When someone shoves over a shover, it's often to isolate, and I often see that represents a weaker hand. Like someone with aces may not shove there and hoping to get some more, because the most they can win then is 10 big blinds.
Right.
Whereas someone with aces might try to get a few more big blinds from someone else. So do either a smaller raise to try to entice a call and just one call. I mean, you don't want a cascade of callers. Or if he's in relatively late position, which he is in the low jack, go ahead and call and hope that one other person comes in so you can get a little bit more equity post flop. And I agree with Chris also that the button, someone cold calling a second all in just screams strength. Now that is, you have to take into account that it is a relatively loose player, and you have to take into account that it's a $50 tournament, which means you can have very erratic play compared to the higher level tournaments. But I still tend to agree with Chris's analysis.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, the $50 plus, you're getting close to the rebuy deadline. If this was with like 2 minutes left before the rebuy, then I would probably for sure get it in because people just are going crazy then. But, I think in the 50, it's not even, to me, it's not even so much the structure as much as it is that the lesser experienced people that play the 50s often are overvaluing hands so much. They think ace jack is a monster. They think king queen is a monster. And it doesn't matter what position they're in. It doesn't matter what the action is in front of them. I've got ace jack, I've got ace queen. So that's another just consideration. So I think for me, based on the ranges that David was assuming, I think you guys have convinced me that maybe folding is the right play. But I think maybe the question is what Chris is doing, maybe John is too, a little bit, is just sort of challenging the ranges. Are the ranges that we've given them a little too tight, at least for the low jack? Jim?
Certainly the rebuy factor does change things. And not only because you don't have to drive home and come back next week to play, but because everyone else is also going to be shoving light. And so that really does change the ranges. And if you, the other thing that he mentions that he doesn't know the unknown young kid under the gun, but the low jack might know him. And if he thinks that he's the kind of guy that shoves a short stack light, then that makes his shove much weaker. And that makes everybody's range wider. And it makes it, I think in that case, a clear call. I haven't played this tournament, but if there's rebuys through the first break, I can see that being a reason to get it in with ace king, even in these circumstances.
Yeah, Rob?
Yeah, I think John made some excellent points. I was gonna mention also. Under the gun shifts for 10 big blinds. The low jack, he could have a lot wider range and be isolating. That's why he goes all in, right? I mean, how often have you done that yourself?
Oh yeah. If I think they're wide and I've got ace 10, I might just rip it there in this tournament.
That's exactly the hand I was thinking. Is ace 10 is in his range, and you got that crushed. The button is the guy we have to worry about. But then what Jim just said, the rebuy period is coming up. This guy is a relatively loose player. He's got 25. He's got the same stack. He could go get it all in and gamble it up a little bit. And if he doesn't hit, he can go and rebuy and have the same stack he has right now. So that could widen his range. And all of a sudden now we have a call.
Yeah, it's come full circle. Well, I mean, and I don't know this player either, this button player, but and they've got a full stack. If they got 25 bigs, they got a full stack. So I see this more with like that 5,000 to 6,000 chips where people don't realize they still have equity in the tournament, so they just kind of pumped it away. But like I've seen it many times where there's like 3 all-ins right before the deadline, and somebody has pocket threes. They're like, well, whatever, they just get it in. It's just what they do because, who knows, maybe I'll hit, maybe I won't, maybe I'm good, maybe I don't care, maybe I want to rebuy. It's just sort of you see that a lot. And I'm not saying that this person did that, but it does happen a fair amount where even in those spots where it's not like there's open shoving, they're just like calling off, 3 shoves with pocket threes. So that is an interesting dynamic. Again, I think it's still, they probably had a little too many chips for that, and it's still a little bit too much before the rebuy deadline. You see that with like 2 or 3 minutes left more often, which is sort of funny. But I don't know. The ranges can open up there for sure. John?
I was just going to ask a question. If this were a $150 tournament and it were after the rebuy period, then what are your thoughts? Then do you think it becomes a clear fold, or is it still a borderline call for you?
I don't know who you is. I'll take a shot at it, but it's still, I still am probably going to get it in here. I would in this spot, and I probably would in the 150. I think. I just tend to think people are doing things wider than they probably are. I just think there's a lot of ace queen, a lot of ace jack, king queen even, and I'm in the stage of the tournament where it's a little early to be saying, "Oh, I'm going to play for the win." But I just know if I can, in that phase 2 of the tournament, before we start getting close to the bubble, if I can chip up, I just know, what I can do with that stack against people on the bubble and how I can consolidate more. And I'm willing to go broke 3 out of 4 times. I don't know. That sounds a little harsh, but I'm willing to go broke 2 out of 3 times, hoping I have more equity than I do probably, for that chance at really, getting a stack where I can actually make a deep run. But I'm second guessing a lot of that with some of the discussion here.
For me, as you move up in stakes, and once we're past the rebuy thing, that's a big consideration, past the rebuy thing. And then to me, the button is the biggest question. If I've moved up now in stakes and I think this button is a competent player, who is not going to be doing this just wildly, I'm more closer to a fold, because that range from a competent player, it's got to be. I mean, you're gonna have to show your hand, so it's got to have a decent amount of strength, and that's the range with that I'm probably folding once we're past the rebuy period.
What is your range there, Chris? I mean, maybe you don't want to say exactly, but you say competent player. Like what is the button's range here? Like if we think this through, maybe even take it to your example of whoever brought that up. It's a $150 tournament. We're past the rebuy deadline. What is a button flat here? Just calling all in. What is a range there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm as the button in this position with these, as described, these two players, a 10 big blind sort of unknown kid and a passive older, fairly tight player. I'm not doing this with anything less than jacks is the big question. I'm definitely doing queens plus. I'm doing it ace king suited, probably ace king, but not much lower than that.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Chris. That would be my range for doing what the button does. There, it'd be ace king is the lowest unpaired hand I would go, and jacks is kind of on the bubble for me. Whether or not I'd call, it would depend upon my read or how I felt that day.
Also, I think ace king is a lot better. Well, I don't know if this is true. I haven't done the math on this, but ace king is better three-handed than four-handed, because you've got, at this point when people are all in pre-flop with over 20 big blinds, most of those hands are going to be paired hands and ace X hands. And so the more of them there are, yeah, you're dominating more of them that have aces, but all it takes is if three of you have aces and one of them has a single pair, there's only one ace left in the deck. And if it doesn't come, you all lose. So once you get this many players all going all in, and you know that most of their hands are going to be pairs and ace X, then it's just not as valuable, because all it takes is those pocket threes that came in on the button.
Right, yeah.
If everyone else is sharing the aces, guess
right.
who's not going home on that?
That's right. So okay. So let's say we don't know the under the gun. We're assuming they're fairly wide with 10 bigs. The low jack, we're giving them credit for a decent hand here, but we're going to give them some. They could be isolating here, so they're a little bit wider maybe than what the initial assumption was. But we think the button is jacks are better in ace king. So what hands? So if we don't like ace king in that spot, then what hands are we then calling with? Is it just kings and aces? Is that all we have left to call with here?
I mean, once you knock ace king out of it, you're down to paired hands, and I wouldn't want to get in there with tens or jacks. No, I don't think so. No, I mean, it's just the best possible hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the big turkey tournament, I was in a hand kind of sort of similar to this, and it was a three-way all in, and it was aces, kings, and queens.
Yeah. 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 I know that result. Okay.
Not to mention that it only takes one of those guys with aces or kings to really chop your odds there quite a bit, and especially. Again, it depends on this button range, but he really shouldn't be in there with many hands that aren't aces, kings, or ace king, and against that, you're crushed.
John, did you have something else there?
Nope, that was pretty much. Well, I did want to make one other point. Even though the button is supposedly relatively loose, most maniacs are loose and aggressive when they are raising. They aren't aggressively calling or loosely calling as much. So it depends upon the player, and maybe this player is just a really loose caller. But most loose players are not necessarily all that loose in just calling, especially in a multi-way pot.
Yeah, that's a great point, because the maniacs are trying to get you to fold. I mean, that's what maniacs love, and so they want fold equity, and you have none here. So this is a real strong play.
Yeah, I think, I'm horrible at like physical reads. I'm really not good at it at all. But once in a while in these $50 tournaments, what the button player will do here is go like, whatever, it's a rebuy, and they'll put their chips in. Then I feel a little better about my ace king. But yeah, if it's, you know what I mean? Like sometimes they just tell you what they have. Then I feel a little bit better. But yeah, if it's a person who's, I think that's a really good point. Loose doesn't mean that they're calling everything off. Usually what that means is they're trying to be aggressive with their marginal hands. Well, anything else on this? I think this is a good example to talk through. Anything else on this, or we'll go to the next question, John?
I was just going to say, with all of the discussion and that we've had on both sides, I think what it comes down to then is it's a fairly close decision. So depending upon your comfort level and your read of the players, you could probably go either way in this exact situation.
Yeah, and some kind of like Chris said too. If you kind of come in with a idea of am I going to rebuy or not, kind of how am I going to approach this tournament in general. Jim, did you have something there?
I was just going to say that when in doubt, if it's a question of a call this close, go with your read. And if you get the sense that the guy that's supposed to have the tightest range is actually just in there to gamble, then I would follow that. You're there, David. You're there in the seat. You know these players better than, well, maybe not better than these guys on the panel here, but if you've got a read, use it as a tiebreaker in these very close places.
All right, good stuff. Well, David, thank you for sending that question in. I don't know if this might have been the tournament he actually won. I'm not sure. So he's a really good player. So thank you, David, for that. We got a few more minutes here, so we'll go through the next ones pretty quickly. This is just a question that came from FPN Colorado, that's the Free Poker Network. I think they're starting out some new leagues out there in Colorado. And the question that came was just generally, they were really just looking for just general thought process. And how do you know when your second pair of hands are good? Like just kind of, and I know this is a broad sweeping question, but just struggling with that. And one of the examples, and I think this wasn't an actual hand, it's just something he made up to give us a flavor. But this situation here where you're, under the gun +1, you have pocket jacks, you open, it folds to the small blind who calls and the big blind calls. So you got pocket jacks, you're in position, both blinds call. Flop comes king 9-3 rainbow. You have pocket jacks, you have second pair at that spot. Check to you, you bet a third of the pot. Both blinds call. The turn is a 10. Check to you. You bet 3/4 pot. Small blind calls, big blind folds. River is a 7. And they lead out. I guess it would be the small blind leads out half pot. So this is just one example, but you can either talk about the specific example or just this general idea of, having these marginal hands. And I did comment out there. I know you guys are involved in the Andrew Brokus book a little bit about playing optimal poker and betting more of a polarized range rather than your kind of your middling hands. But I'll just open it up and see who has a comment either on that hand or this general idea of having sort of middle strength hands. First one to unmute gets it. Chris.
So the two things I think about in this particular situation, but in kind of all of these situations, is do we know anything about these players? Some players will call very widely and speculatively from the small blind with suited connectors and all their pocket pairs and all those kinds of things, which gives us a much wider range here versus some players who will raise a lot of hands from the small blind or fold and won't call much from the small blind. So when we have a small blind calling here, it's helpful to know sort of what situation we're in. But more broadly, when I'm dealing with these kinds of situations, and I think Andrew Brokus talks about this from dealing with a condensed range, is that we don't want to be, we're not going to get 3 streets of value with our jacks when we have like a king show up on the flop. And so this particular situation, I question why we're even betting on the turn. And so, because I think what we want to do with jacks is navigate towards showdown and hope that, especially in position, and trying to get there as easily as we can. And I think the continuation bet is fine, but then I'm questioning why we're betting out onto that turn, which puts us into it basically forces the small blind to fold out a lot of hands that we're beating, which we can then call on the river. And I did this through Flopzilla, and once we reach this point on the river, we're in real rough shape. And So that would be my starting point. Is we probably want to bet less.
I actually think this is a great line with a hand much weaker than jacks, because the small bet on the flop keeps them in the hand with all their junk, and then 3/4 on the turn. I think one of the nice things about that is that you can actually you've now, when they call that, you've now successfully eliminated a bunch of their hands from the hand range. So what are the hands that are calling the turn but not raising and not folding and then leading on the river, which is a brick? Well, it's not a straight brick, but it's bricky.
Yeah.
Bricky.
It's brick-like.
It's brick-esque. So I think if you were on the turn here, I'd bet 3/4 pot with 6-4 suited or something that's never going to win anything otherwise. And once he's called, I think you're in a really, as he points out, you're in a really tough spot with your jacks here, because you're basically with a bluff catching on the river. There's no way he's betting for value on the river with worse than pocket jacks. He's not betting for value with ace 10 there. So you do have to, I would be thinking at this point, out of the hands that he called from the small blind, how many is he bluffing with, and how many are kings or 2-pair or better that have me beat here? And unless I know something about the opponent that's going to tell me he's more likely to bluff or more likely to bet for value, I would just treat it like a math question, as boring as that sounds.
John?
I really like everything that both Chris and Jim said. I'm going to deviate from this exact hand, and I would say the time that I get most concerned is when there's an ace. People love to play aces. So if I'm sitting with a hand like jacks, that's when I become the most conservative. I still probably make the continuation bet. And if I'm in position like this, I can check the turn and then evaluate what I want to do on the river. But it makes a good bluff catcher at that point, a great bluff catcher. And you can get by with less than probably your river call will be less than your turn bet was in this particular case.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Rob?
Yeah, I think the line is wrong. I think what they're doing here is definitely wrong. Obviously, on the flop, you're the pre-flop aggressor. On the flop, you can bet your polarized range. It's a perfect flop for that. It's got that one high card and a couple of lower cards. Perfect flop for the continuation bet. But then once you get called by both of them on the turn, they both check. At that point, you need to check back. What you do by checking back is you keep both of their ranges really wide. You know, when you get one of them to call a bet, especially 3/4 of the pot, that just means their range just went way, way up. And you definitely will have to fold to a bet on the river. Whereas if you check that back and then face a bet on the river, first of all, like John said, you know, you're going to face a smaller bet than you bet out on the turn probably, and you're going to be able to call that because he's going to be leading out with a much wider range because he checked on the turn and he did not have to call a bet on the turn. So I think the line there is, you continuation bet on the flop, check the turn, and then call the river.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I just did some quick math based on, what they had said here. And basically, you're facing on the river, you're facing probably about a 12.5 big blind bet if it's half pot. And so now you're making that call, you're making a call for about 23 big blinds for the total of the hand. Versus if you can check back turn there, you're facing maybe a 9 big blind. It's like it's 5 big blind bet on the river if it's half pot, and like 9 big blind total. And that feels like a more, valid sort of value of this hand, at this stage of the tournament. So yeah, I think the checking back to me on the turn is huge. I think it does, like Rob said, it just opens up. Now they might think they can bet their 10 or bet their 9 for value. You've given them an opportunity to bluff at it, that sort of thing. And to make a call is just far less painful. You're calling, 5 instead of 13 or whatever on the river. So I think that's the right play. And I think that is the issue that a lot of people get into when they say the second pair of hands. How do we know if they're good? A lot of times you're trying to make a decision if they're good or not in a massive pot. And I think if you can practice a little pot control, and you guys kind of alluded to it already, but when you have one of those medium strength hands, like you're betting jacks here, you're only called by better, and only worse hands are folding. I mean, that's the exact opposite of what you want. If you're betting, I mean, the question is, why are you betting on the turn? Why, whenever you bet, you should be asking yourself, what am I trying to accomplish here? Well, if you're betting to try to get them to fold, then they're only going to fold worse hands. If you're betting because you think you have the best hand, they're only going to call with better hands. So you're just not really accomplishing that. When you're betting for trying to get them to fold, you want them to fold better hands than yours. Well, they're not going to here. And if you're betting for value, you want them to call you with worse hands, and they're not going to here. So I don't know if I even said all that right, but I think you get my point. So I think that's the question. That's where the stuff that we've been studying, this idea of when you have a medium strength hand, there really is no big advantage for you to bet there. You're just not picking up value. You're only losing value on one side, and you're not gaining any extra value on the other side.
Another way of looking at what you said, Steve, would be on the turn, you're really turning your jacks into a bluff. And it's really, like Jim said, six deuce suited, you're getting almost the same value as you are betting your jacks there. It's too good of a hand to turn into a bluff there, in my opinion.
Yep. Well said.
And just to go back to like the kind of the overall is the thought process in determining when your second pair hands are actually good is sort of, I might even recommend trying to change the thinking there a little. And really what we're trying to do is the thought process for navigating our second pair hands, in these types of situations. We're never going to actually know they're good. All we can know is what our second pair hands are compared to what our opponent's range might be. And it might be right in the middle of there, and that means that what we need to do is pull back a little and try to navigate towards getting to as cheaply as we can to a showdown, because we still have a pretty strong hand and we can beat a lot of bluffs. It's possible our opponent off of that, in this example hand or other hands sort of like it, there's a lot of people who are going to stick around with a 9, stick around with a 10. They're going to stick around with some of their gut shots and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of hands which we're going to be ahead of that we can get to that river. And if they then lead out with that, we can call. And yeah, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but we haven't lost as much as if we're trying to bet to see where we're at and figure out if we're actually good and all those kinds of things, which I think are not the best way to be thinking about hands like this.
Good. Any other thoughts on that? I know it's a big topic, but any other thoughts for FPN Colorado, Jim?
I guess if we're just talking about factors to consider in moments like this, I would consider what does the villain think of my image right now? Where do they think I am in my hand range? Like, is my actual hand in the top of my range or in the bottom of my range? I would be thinking about what kind of hands would they want me to fold on a board like this? Are there some really obvious candidates? If there aren't, that kind of weighs them towards value a bit. And probably most importantly would be, and Chris, I love that you started talking about starting to think about this in ranges, is of the hands that he calls out of the small blind, what are my cards blocking to make less likely? If I want to think about if my hand is good as a bluff catcher, if it's blocking any nuts or premium hands, then I'd rather call with a less valuable hand that blocks their value bets than with a medium strength hand that doesn't get in their way at all. So those would be other things that I would think about.
Good stuff. All right, guys, let's go on to the next one. Good stuff. FPN Colorado, let us know if we missed anything that you wanted to address. All right, so this is just an interesting one that we all deal with. Some of you guys know Jefferson, really, really good dude. But he says, all right, just curious, and we've talked about this a little bit. We've had some psychology experts on and stuff, but he just says, just curious how other players handle adversity. Specifically, when you grind a tournament, you're playing really well, and then blammo, you run your pocket queens into pocket kings and you bust a few people from the bubble. Obviously, we all know what that is. He says, you played great. You did nothing wrong, but you still deal with a teeth-gnashing cold deck. Teeth-gnashing cold deck. I can get over it relatively quick, but I still get emotional. How do others deal? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I mean, it never feels any better.
Right.
You can develop strategies for how you're going to handle it internally, and I think the strategies that are going to help you with that are going to help you with a lot of other things in your life too. This is just one of those perspective questions where it's you're not entitled to win the tournament. You're not entitled to win when you have aces. When you've played a million hands and you've seen aces lose so many times, it really helps. It just helps that you have to just sort of accept this was the time when I was supposed to leave this tournament, and I'm going to take a lesson from this. Maybe I could have avoided running queens into kings. Like you say, you did nothing wrong, but I would say, look, take this as an opportunity to look a little closer, and maybe if you can find in the future that same spot and you feel like you took some lesson from this, then that'll make it feel a little better next time.
John?
Well, I was just going to say the hand that I was talking about earlier, the aces, kings, and queens. Now I'm going to turn it into a bad beat. And I was the one with the aces, and of course the queens ended up winning that hand. And, I was really hoping to do well. I only had time to play once. It's on the larger side of buy-ins for what I play. So it was a painful tournament for me, and I've been having a bad run lately. So that makes it more painful as well. And the way to get over it is just to remind yourself, even with aces, you're supposed to lose some of the time. And also try to notice the times when the shoe's on the other foot, the times when you have the queens and beat the aces, and make a mental note of that. That really helps me out, because then it says, what comes around goes around. And eventually you'll be on the other side of it. Eventually your aces will hold up. And keep in mind that even for the best possible players, it takes a long time to realize your true equity. There's a lot of variance in poker. And particularly when you're playing live poker, you're not seeing that many hands. I personally, on a good month, I'll get like 4 tournaments in. And in the grand scheme of things, that's nothing. So, you just have to keep that in mind and come back to asking the question if you're really playing good poker, because variance is so high, it's really easy to fool yourself either way, to convince yourself that it's a good play when it's not, or it's a bad play when it is, because the cards don't always, or the results don't always reflect the quality of the decision.
Yeah, one thing, I mean, the obviously these things just happen and you've got to kind of roll with them. But one thing that has helped me in terms of dealing with, situations that went wrong is not necessarily when you have kings or queens and you run into the kings, or you have kings and person with queens spikes a queen, right? There isn't much you can do. Those are just going to play themselves. But the one thing about this statement, and I don't mean to call into question the questioner, but the thing that actually helps me deal with it is thinking about how I played the entire tournament. And I have never walked away from a tournament without feeling like there's a hand I could have learned something from. There's not a situation that I would have liked to have played a little differently. So the idea that you played great and did nothing wrong might be one way to really start to think about this a little differently. Like, I think there is always something we can learn from tournaments. It might not be that big blammo bust out hand where we just got coolered on a an unfortunate run out, but there are situations where maybe we could have gotten to that situation and had more chips. Maybe we could have been in that situation, and maybe that doesn't knock us out of the tournament. Maybe there's all these different other choices we made, 3 levels ago that we don't even remember because it was like a king jack offsuit that we just maybe mangled the way we played it. And those are the kind of situations that I like to make sure that I'm trying to take notes on, going back and looking at and focusing on, rather than these sort of big dramatic, I just wish that queen wouldn't have spiked down the river. Those are the ones you can't control it and you can't change it, but you can change the way you've played those other hands that you can learn something from.
Rob?
Yeah, I think what Chris said, what John said, what Jim said, all of it very, very valid. I used to get when I first started playing live, I would get very emotional. Not so much when I played online. I never ruined a mouse or a monitor or anything, but I used to get very emotional because I didn't understand some of the situations that I lost in, right? So running your queens into kings, that's going to happen. That's just a fact of life. What Chris said, very, very valid. I try to remember those times where I ran my queens into kings and spiked the queen, because that happened to get me to, I don't think I've ever won a tournament or come in the money in a tournament without having opposite variance, if you know what I mean. Having good variance coming my way to keep me in the tournament to get to that point. So you have to remember those types of things. And then another thing I've done in the last about 10 years is I started meditating. Read Tommy Angelo. He's the premier meditation guy. But it really gives you more perspective and allows you to keep your emotions in check, because there's times even during a tournament where you'll run into a bad beat, but you're still there. And you have to continue to play your best game. And if you get emotional about losing all those chips on that bad play that someone else made, it's just as bad as running your queens into kings and leaving the tournament. So meditation, keeping your cool, knowing that, especially in a situation where you run your queens into kings, that just plays itself. It's not that you did something wrong. It's just that happens.
Man, I can just reiterate everything you guys said is just so good. I think John was reading my mail. I mean, that's basically exactly how I replied, exactly kind of what you said. I'm supposed to lose some of these things. I'm a math guy, so I'm too logical by nature for my own good. Just ask my family. Like they want to talk to me about something, and I'll just kind of go into the logic phase and like, no, I just want to emote. I just want to tell you, and so I'm kind of logical to a fault a little bit. Like I picture those spots. I just see a normal distribution, and I know I'm okay. 2 sigma event. Let's move on with our day. So to me, that's a little bit easier. So some of this is just personality driven, but I do agree with what you guys said as far as remember those good times. I know that it's actually they've done psychological studies on this, that good things that happen to us are like Teflon. We just forget them. And bad things that happen to us are like Velcro. They just stick. And so one of the things that I've learned in life, which I try to apply to the poker table, is when you get that positive variance that Rob is talking about, take 7 seconds and just let it soak in. Like actually enjoy it. Like think to yourself, I got my ace queen in against ace king and I spiked a queen. Like let that sink in. You can remember it later, but it also just, you'll start to feel less bad about yourself, because I think most people feel like they are unluckier than most. Like I talk to so many players that I swear they think they should win every tournament. If it wasn't for bad luck, they would win every tournament. And I think they honestly believe that. And maybe, I guess it's true. I don't know. Maybe they're just amazing. But I think we just all naturally think we're more unlucky than everybody else. And so when those positive variance things hit, I really do think just let that soak in, whether that's through meditation or whatever, or just in that moment, soak it up, man. Just soak it up. And hopefully that'll carry you through. But I mean, we're all talking about how do you justify, how do you move through those things. I mean, Chris's comment is so good. Like usually when my bust out hand, I'm like, crap, I ran 10s into ace queen, whatever. He shouldn't have woke up with ace queen there in the big blind. But the reality is I got myself down to 9 big blinds somehow. And I did that in a way that I could have avoided, and I wouldn't have had to shove my pocket 10s. I think there is at least, not always, but at least a chance to look back and say, okay, what got me to that place where I was now susceptible to negative variance? So I think this is a great conversation, great questions, great comments. Jim?
I think the best thing that's been said on this, Chris, you're supposed to lose with aces. You are supposed to lose with aces a certain percentage of the time. When you get in queens versus kings, you're supposed to hit a queen every once in a while. Every once in a while, like that's what makes poker great. And seeing both sides of it, knowing that it happens to you as often as it happens to everybody else, if you play enough hands, then that has really helped me a lot. Practically speaking, I would say literally just stand up from the table. Don't say anything in the heat of the moment. Go for a short walk around. If you're at home playing online, just step away from the computers, go walk around the block, take several deep breaths, and just think about, what really is important. You're in a position to be playing poker. You've already won the life free roll.
The life lottery. Yeah,
so,
for sure.
That just kind of helps. But yeah, take some deep breaths, take a short walk, and move on to the next tournament.
Yeah, I've said that if you're winning more than 4 out of 5 times when you get your aces in against kings, you're running really well. Right? You're supposed to lose 1 out of 5. John?
I was just going to mention, you mentioned everyone thinks that they're the most unlucky player in the world, and that's only true for one of our listeners. Everyone else is wrong. So chances are it's not you.
Love it. Jefferson, maybe it is Jefferson. I mean, we don't know. It could be Jefferson if it's one of those people. That's fine. That's a great point. Yeah. All right, guys, let's move on to the next. Let's see what we had here. Oh, that was all we had. I don't know if anything can pop up on Facebook or anything else that you guys want to add. And you guys have anything else that you've seen pop up there at all?
Just on the last one, we had a comment. Yes, I always get that you're just as. I always get that you're just a lucky player. Never, you played that very well. Especially being a woman playing with mostly men.
So what do you take from that?
I think people just blame a lot of stuff on luck.
Yeah. Unless they win the tournament?
Well, yeah, then it's all skill.
Right.
Every time you lose, it's bad luck. Every time you win, it's great skill.
No, we're saying this sort of tongue in cheek, but I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard it. I mean, just with the podcast, I mean, it's I hear that a lot, and people are sometimes saying it directly, sometimes they're saying it indirectly, but that is the implication, is that if they win a tournament, they are a really, really good player, and if they lose a tournament, they were really, really unlucky. Now, maybe that could be true to some extent, but it's funny how it doesn't work both ways a lot of times. Chris?
Yeah, I know, and I mean, I guess that gets to a broader sense of when you are running this bad, just deal with it on your own, and don't abuse the player who beat you, don't abuse the dealer, just be an adult and be a mature person, because like we all have bad situations that come up, and and actually, to be honest, when the coin is flipped and somebody is sort of like saying, "Oh, you donkey, you should have," and I'm sitting there stacking their chips. It actually kind of makes me feel pretty good, because I'm like but for the most part, I really feel like people just need to just take their beats with class and dignity.
Nice. That's well said. And I do think there's, personality does play a role. Some of us, I think, are more predisposed to being able to handle that in one way, and some people are more emotional. So there's part of that. But I agree. Like, I just wonder what happens in like real life when, somebody cuts in front of them on the highway. Are these the same people that are ready to pull out their shotgun? I mean, what, you just not, I mean, I'm being somewhat serious. Like, what happens in real life when, if there's a medical diagnosis, or, they get laid off. I mean, all these things are horrible things that happen in life. That's why I think poker is sort of a petri dish for life. And I think that it does give me some insight into people and how they're probably wired in their life if they can't handle, busting a $30 tournament with dignity. But I feel bad for those people too, because if there's that much emotion inside of them, so that much rage that's associated with that, I wonder, is this the right hobby sometimes? John?
Well, particularly since in tournament poker, everyone but one player in the tournament is a loser.
Is eliminated. Mm-hmm.
Right. You may still have won money, but you still didn't win as much as you could have, and you didn't finish in first place. And for me, that's always kind of my goal, is to get to first place. But you just have to take it all in stride. I mean, I make a point whenever I bust out to wish everyone well at the table, wish them good luck and having a good game, and mention that I enjoyed playing with them. And I think that's a good, it's as much for me as it is for them, because it's to remind me I went to play that tournament to enjoy myself.
Yep.
And part of it is the challenge of competition, and you're going to lose sometime, and that's just all part of it, and you have to accept it all. And allowing you to handle those beats is one of the good side effects poker can have.
Mm-hmm. And it's, and man, we could go on for hours about this. I love this because, part of why I play for fun, but I am competitive and I want to win. But I love, all of you guys included, the relationships that I built through poker. I'm not the same person I was just because of the great relationships I built. And part of that comes from, I believe, being able to handle negative variance at the table, because that's attractive to people. When somebody busts you and you take it well, and you're just like, hey, good luck with everything, rest of the way. Oh, that's poker. Don't worry about it. That sort of stuff is really attractive to people. And I think people want to kind of hang out with you a little bit more. So even from a selfish relationship building perspective, there's a lot of value in just being able to handle negative variance, even though, but just, I want to go on record as saying, but it really sucks. Like when you're in day 2 of a tournament and you get one outed, it really, really, really sucks. When you're in the main event and get one outed twice in 3 hands to lose your stack on day 1, when you're playing it for the first time ever and it's your dream and it's over in a couple hours, it really sucks, but at the end of the day, life is far bigger than that tournament. But I do want to admit that it does suck. All right, well, guys. Well, any other comments there, or we can wrap it up there? Everything good? All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. Just a couple of reminders. Thanks to you guys, Chris, Jim, Rob, John, everybody else online watching this thing on Facebook Live, who's listening to it on the podcast. Next week, we are scheduled to have Ryan LaPlante, Learn Pro Poker, formerly from Minnesota, bracelet winner, fantastic dude. I'm super excited to actually do the interview with him and have the panel chatting with him about what's going on in his world and get some insights into his poker strategy. But make sure you go to rec.poker. We're continuing to update the site. New stuff's going out there. A lot of cool stuff. So check that out. If you want to do us a personal favor, wherever you're listening to this thing, it's iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, whatever, like us, rate us, review us. Those things are huge as far as helping get the word out about what we're doing, and just let people know about this thing. We're super excited about it. We love kind of the direction we've been going, these panels, the listener questions, building community. So let people know about this thing. We think it's a great tool to grow the game. And with that, just a final reminder, a special thank you to Running Aces Racetrack and Casino. They are our official sponsor of all things Rec Poker, and Learn Pro Poker, who is a sponsor of the podcast. So thanks to you guys. And with that, we will sign out, and we'll catch you next week. Take care, everybody.